Okay, I am going to start. Welcome, everyone. People are coming in from their bike rides and walks on this beautiful evening. I know I have helmet hair from my bike ride that I had around the waterfront trail about an hour ago, so pardon me for that. Um, Thanks for coming. My name is Rick Manning. I'm the Executive Director of the Friends of Stewart Park. And we are delighted to welcome Andy Zepp and the Finger Lakes Land Trust to walk us through some of the work they've been doing and on the water quality in Cayuga Lake, specifically with in relation to toxic algae. We do have a short introduction that I wanted to provide you first. Thank a few folks and just tell you very briefly about what we're up to in Stewart Park. But I do first need to thank our sponsors for the Centennial. As those of you know who have tuned in previously to some of these or just follow the Friends of Stewart Park, this is the Centennial, the 100th anniversary of the founding of Stewart Park as a public park on July 4th, 1921. And it's been kind of a goal for us to complete a lot of our revitalization work, and we've made great progress in that. We haven't done all that we hope to do, but we will continue and get it all done soon, we hope. But I'd like to thank Anchor Capital Management, Bousquet Holstein, Cargill, CSP Management, City Harbor, Finger Lakes Wealth Management, Hancock Estabrook, Iron Design, La Tourelle, M&T Bank, McPherson Builders, NYSEG, Parkitects, TG Miller, Tatum Engineering, the Home Depot, Tompkins Trust Company, and Wegmans for their Centennial sponsorship for all of the events that we've done, both Zoom events in the spring and a lot of our summer programming as well. We do have another program, the last, as far as we know anyway, the last of our Centennial Zoom programs coming up on October 27th, a Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock. And local historian Corey Earl will discuss Patrick Conway and his very famous Ithaca concert band. He was a major star nationally back in around the turn of the century and performed a lot in what at the time was called Renwick Park. And then he became, he was originally from Cortland, but he joined the Ithaca College, or what at the time was the Ithaca Conservatory faculty. So it's a really fascinating story that has a history in Stewart Park because he did perform at the band shell in between the two pavilions on a regular basis during the summer events when the park was such a popular destination. So if you're interested in music and just park history, join us for that. Just a little pitch here for a fundraising campaign that we've been doing all year. We just today got a $20,000 pledge to get us over $100,000 towards our $150,000 goal for the Mayor Stewart Challenge Fund. Back in 1921, the mayor donated $150,000 of his own funding towards the purchase and enhancement of the park before it opened as a public park. So in honor of that, we're trying to raise that funding. And what we're doing with it is, I'll just show you a couple of things. One is the gift that we received today for $20,000 was to help us on the phase 2 restoration of the overlook, the Fuertes Stone overlook right by the boathouse. 3 years ago, we restored all the upper area. When the lake went down and the Swan Pond went down, we discovered that there was a gaping hole in the foundation. So we hope with this funding and supplemental funding, we'll be able to repair that during the course of the winter when the water is down. A lot of the money will be used as a match for the splash pad, which is the final phase of our playground project. We have a grant into the state for $500,000, which should be announced or awarded in November or December. If we get that, then we will use a good portion of that funding for that. And then the last thing that we know of now, originally it was designed to do a lot of small projects. And one thing that we're going to do in our playground, as you can see, the roller slide here off of the summit of the playground is very popular. And the kids who use it don't seem to know to use the stairs. They actually just come down and run right back up the side. and they have worn out all the beautiful grass that was there. So we're going to put in some turf to keep it safe, not slippery, and to prevent erosion down onto our surfacing. So that's another item that we'll be using with our Centennial Challenge Fund. So if you're interested in supporting it, we'd really appreciate it. You can see the link below, and we will put a link, Janelle will put a link in the chat as well. And speaking of which, if you have questions, it's best not to use the chat, but to use the question. This is a webinar, so it's slightly different than normal Zoom. And we will kind of look at those questions, and if they're redundant, we'll combine them and we'll ask Andy, we'll save them for the end and ask anything. If there's some technical issues, please also put them in there, and Leah, who's helping us out, will respond to you directly. So by way of introduction to Andy, he's worked a lot on the Blue Way Trail, on the birding trail on the lake. We all love the lake. This is a view that I took today of the beautiful, beautiful view of Cayuga Lake. And really it's related to Stewart Park. It's a very interesting history. Back in the day of rowing, the rowing course before the flood channel from the 1870s, really into the 1970s, was on Cayuga Lake. And this is right off of Cayuga Lake, where the finish line was located. It was such a big thing at the time that the Cassadilla Preparatory School built the Cassadilla Boathouse in the park. And it was the first building in the park that was constructed in 1894. And we've been working all year with a CFA grant from the state to restore the building. And it's almost done on the outside, and it's looking very beautiful. We're really proud of it and really excited. Historic Ithaca has been a leader. City of Ithaca has been involved and contributed to the project. So this is something to look at when you head down to the park for sure. And with that, I'd like to welcome Andy Zepp, Executive Director of the Friends of the Finger Lakes Land Trust, to help us understand a lot of the current issues involved in the lake, to help us keep it clean and beautiful. So thank you, Andy, and welcome.
Well, thanks, Rick, and good evening, everyone. This evening, I'm going to tell you, give you an overview on the work of the Land Trust, but also talk more generally about the challenges we face for Cayuga Lake and all of the Finger Lakes, and then also talking a bit about land conservation challenges in the watershed. There will be ample time for questions, as I'm going to cover kind of a pretty wide range of subjects in a brief time. So definitely follow on with any questions. Now bear with me just a sec, so I'm going to share my screen here.
I see a last-minute email from me, Andy.
Yeah. Hang on just a second. I'm having a little difficulty just with something's wrong with my share my screen here.
It's sharing. I can see it. If you click on the PowerPoint button below, maybe.
Sorry. So sorry about that.
That's right.
I hadn't realized that was happening. How's that?
Perfect.
All right. Just moving a bar.
Yeah.
My apologies, everyone.
No problem.
If you go up to slideshow and click present, I think that'll get you there.
Yeah, it's hidden. It's hidden under the.
Oh, I see.
I can't see where it is underneath.
There's also an icon at the bottom to the right.
I'm so sorry, everybody.
No, one up, one up. And yeah, over a little more. Yeah. Keep one over.
One that looks like a little projector screen.
One more over. Two.
Right.
Go two more over, Andy, and you'll be on it.
The furthest to the right.
Furthest to the right. Yeah.
To the right.
There you go. That's it.
There we go. Sorry, people. You can tell I handle IT at the Land Trust. That is the key to our success. For those who aren't familiar, the Land Trust has been around for over 30 years. Though 30 years ago is about when my learning of technology stopped. Fortunately, we have 15 other people who work here, and we've been managed to conserve over 27,000 acres across the region. And this is a view a beautiful Cayuga Lake up the lake a ways at one of its widest spots. And I'm particularly going to focus on our conservation of both land and water resources in the Cayuga Lake watershed, because of course, they're inextricably intertwined. What happens on the land affects the water. But to start out, for a little context, I want to talk about the Finger Lakes generally. This is the service area of the Finger Lakes Land Trust, and it includes not just the watersheds of 11 Finger Lakes, but in the bottom of the screen, you see about 40% of our service areas actually drains to the Susquehanna River and the Chesapeake Bay. All you have to do is where the last glacial advance stopped, south of Ithaca, places like West Danby, you can see these glacial moraines or hills that really, you know, are the drainage divide between water from our lakes that goes out to St. Lawrence and everything else that goes south. This is looking backwards at where those 27,000 acres are, and each of these circles represents a project the Land Trust completed, and the bigger the circle, the bigger the project. And our goal is not to cover the entire map with circles, but really this area is the size of Vermont, and there are lots of public planning documents that agree there are areas that are most worthy of conservation. So we hope to conserve intact landscapes. For example, the south end of Skaneateles Lake is the most pristine. We want to do a lot of work there. We're also following other areas such as here in Tompkins County, where we really want to proactively not just protect individual pieces of land, but whole landscape. Now, one thing about these different colors, the green are our nature preserves. The Land Trust owns and manages more than 40 preserves that you can go visit. Typically, there's some kind of parking area and trail system. So understandably, these are our most well-known because people go out and enjoy them. But also these tan circles you see are actually conservation easements. So these are areas where we hold a legal interest in the property, not to provide for public access, but to limit future development. Then we're responsible for working with not just the owner who donated or sold the easement, but all those people who come later, and to ensure that that public trust is upheld. This is particularly well suited for types of land like farms, where I think everyone would agree that the best way to conserve a farm and keep it producing food is not to have government or a nonprofit own it, but simply remove that threat of selling for a big housing development. The last I want to mention is those kind of purple lilac circles. Those are partnership projects where we work with a variety of both government and nonprofit partners. We've helped the towns of Dryden and the town of Ithaca acquire parks. We work with New York State to add lands to places like Connecticut Hill Wildlife Area. And we've added land for the National Forest and for other nonprofits. So that's where we have a little bit of, can be a bit more nimble sometimes. So we use that to secure additional lands. Now, since we were first founded 32 years ago, we have been focused on the Cayuga Lake watershed. This is a view from our Roy H. Park Preserve in the town of Dryden of Upper 6 Mile Creek, which has been a priority for all 32 years of the Land Trust. We have protected, I think, about 16 different properties in that watershed and have actually accelerated our work there lately. If you've ever seen 6 Mile Creek downtown, it's pretty turbid, not too clean looking. But this area, which is off of Irish Settlement Road, is a lot of water from springs, cold, clean water, hosts brook trout, beautiful, one of the most pristine streams in the area. And this is open to the public. You can go visit, just a wonderful resource. Our work on preserves, there's more in Tompkins County than elsewhere. It's because we were founded here, and also there's tremendous community support. Just several months ago, we acquired our latest preserve, which is called Cayuga Cliffs. This is not the Bell Station property, which I'll talk about later, but this is just north of Myers Point, which you can see in this photo. And this is a property of about 200 acres that includes 4,000 feet of what I call railroad shoreline. The railroad is technically on the lakeshore itself, but this will ensure that almost a mile of shoreline won't be developed. And here's another view of that. And for reference, if you ever go to Taconic Falls State Park and go out on the point and look across at that wall of green, this is much of that wall of green. Now, we've raised a considerable amount of money to acquire this land, but our work is really just beginning because it's a very attractive place. We know that there'll be a considerable public use. So we have to plan carefully, not just for a year or two from now when we open this preserve, but thinking down the road, say 20, 30, 40 years, when it's quite possible Lansing will be a pretty dense town in terms of basically a suburb with considerable population. So we have to think carefully about designing the trails so they're sustainable and won't erode, public safety and liability issues. And in this case too, you can see it has a number of fields. And is there an opportunity for compatible agriculture? How are we going to keep them free from invasive species? So right now we're developing a management plan, and we'll be implementing that and opening this site to the public in 2023. And this is typical for whenever we acquire a new preserve. A lot of thought goes into it and how to safely host the public. Now the preserves, as I mentioned, get the most attention, but really conservation easements, we protect far more acreage. And the state in recent years has provided some funding programs to support these efforts. In the past, most of our easements were donated, and there are some tax incentives available to landowners who donate an easement. But there are many landowners who really, they can't afford to do that, particularly farmers or people who are inheriting family land. They're looking to send a kid to college or fund their retirement. So this ability to purchase these easements is very meaningful. This is a stretch of 6 Mile Creek that is right behind the village or the hamlet of Brooktondale. And we worked with Lois Lounsbury. The landowner has been there. It's a multi-generational family farm and has 4,000 feet of frontage on the creek, about 120-acre property. And here's a view of some of the farmland was protected, but the strength of an easement is it can be tailored to the specifics of the property. So in this case, we actually surveyed a stream corridor protection zone that is largely hands-off, but also provided for continued farming on the land and then prohibited additional subdivision, things like mining, commercial development. And we're able to pay Lois for the value of that as determined by an appraiser. And now that is part of the land records. Essentially, day-to-day, very little changes, but we know that when that land is passed on or sold, those new owners have to abide by that agreement. And the land trust both monitors that agreement annually, but also works with a partner on whatever issues come up with that land with the landowner. Now, as I mentioned, the land trust since day one has focused on projects that are driven primarily by water quality. But when we first experienced outbreaks of cyanobacteria or toxic algae several years ago, we realized that that really was an existential threat to the region. Almost all of the Finger Lakes are public drinking water supplies. Also, they support a tourism economy that's about $2 billion. So when we saw scenes like this is off of East Shore Drive in town of Ithaca, we realized we had to kind of reprioritize our projects and do more in partnership with our lake associations and other government conservation agencies. So a little bit about our understanding of toxic algae. And this is, I'm going to share what I'm learning from experts. I'm by no means an expert, but this has been guiding our work. Well, first, cyanobacteria have been around for millions of years, so it's not new. What's new is the activation, because essentially it's kind of lurking, waiting for the right conditions. And the right conditions basically require giving the cyanobacteria a lot of phosphorus and nutrients, and then warming that water up and having still conditions. And it seems the consensus is, though research is still going on, that three factors are happening that are creating this problem and why we're seeing more of it. Because first off is climate change. On one hand, particularly in August, September, we're seeing higher lake water temperatures. At the same time, we're having more intense storm events that are washing more nutrients into the lake. The second key issue is land use, that we've continued to change land uses in ways that, when combined with the climate change issues, lead to more nutrients being in the lake. The last is kind of the wild card, and not all lakes may be affected in the same way, but we have non-native invasive mussels in our lakes that hitched a ride from Asia. First, it was the zebra mussel, these little ubiquitous mussels. The story is they got in the ballast of freighters that then went to the Great Lakes. And when they flushed their ballast water, out came the mussels, and very happy because it's comparable to where they're from in Asia, but without the predators. So I lived actually on Cayuga Lake about in the 90s when zebra mussels came out. And when I first heard that mussels play a role, I said, well, why didn't we have toxic algae in the 90s? Well, part of the reason seems to be that zebra mussels in the Finger Lakes have a limited range, kind of like a bathtub ring. They have constraints on how much habitat there is. But following the zebra mussels, a little slightly larger cousin, the quagga mussel, came over. And a mussel researcher discovered, by looking at the bottom of Owasco Lake in particular, where it was too deep for zebra mussels, they found literally, I think they estimate, billions of mussels. And when you look at these little mussels filtering the nutrients and altering the nutrient cycling, they believe, they're not certain, but they believe they may play a significant role in these toxic algae outbreaks. So that's still, very much, we're learning about that. But we, the Land Trust, asked these experts to say, well, if it's all the mussels, should we even be focused on the land? And they said, oh no, we got plenty of issues with the land. And this photo of Taughannock illustrates, one of the big issues, and that's that we have a fairly nutrient-rich soil naturally. And it doesn't take, you go up Route 13 on the hill on the east side, you go to any vantage point after a big rain around here, you can see lots of examples like this of sediment loading into the lake. And essentially, this is part of the problem of feeding the nutrients that if it's warm enough, activate the cyanobacteria, the toxic algae. In fact, the year that we had our first big outbreak, Rick might know, but I think it was like 5-6 years ago, we really had, the region was hit hard. It was a combination of weather conditions where the year before we had a drought, where not much phosphorus or nitrogen washed in. It was all sitting there on the land. And then we had a really wet year. And this is a satellite photo. You can see a sediment plume that in that case went all the way from Stewart Park past Myers Point. So the amount of nutrient loading in our lakes is really significant. So that's something to a degree, erosion is a natural process, but we've altered the land in ways where it's much more than it should be. And part of that is climate related. This pretty little waterfall is Maple Avenue in West Danby, a little road down in the hamlet of West Danby, where this was one of those intense storm events. What's happening as with climate change, it's a little warmer. These storm systems have more capacity to hold water. And all you have to do is read the news of all these localities getting hit with 4 inches in an hour, 6 inches in an hour. And of course, that is washing massive amounts of nutrients and soil into our aquatic systems. This was an interesting storm. And just to give you a sense of how localized it was, West Danby a Newfield got 4 inches in about an hour or less. The airport got 1 inch. So up in Ithaca, and where I live in Ithaca, it was a summer thunderstorm, but it really didn't do any big damage. But here, the railroad that goes along the Cayuga Inlet was washed out like for 100 yards. It was just hanging in space, like all that ballast and that underneath it was totally washed away. So if you think about, particularly with agriculture and row crops, picture that kind of scouring of how much nutrients we're now loading in the lake. Now, if you live down in kind of West Danby or Newfield, there's no longer a lot of farming going on. So it's less of an issue in some areas, but this is up the lake near Union Springs. This is an aerial view of an area known as Great Gully, which is kind of a gorge that threads its way through the center of the picture. And essentially it's halfway between Aurora and Union Springs. But you can see by this picture just how much of the upper watershed is in an agriculture, and particularly row crops, because we do have hay fields, but we have less and less pasturing of livestock. And really what we have a lot of is corn and soybeans. And if you think about during a heavy rain, those fields, say in June, there's not a lot holding the soil on there. And farming, even from when I was a student, years ago, farming has changed a lot. And this is an example shot on a local road of what has become typical for a full-time farmer of the scale of a tractor. And if you own a tractor that big, it could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. You're competing on a commodity basis with farmers in Iowa, even Brazil, all over the world. And you're trying to, make a living on that. So you got your big tractor, you don't want to turn around in 20-acre fields or 40-acre fields. So you rip out the hedgerows that kind of reduce runoff to a degree, because you want a 100-acre, a 200-acre field. So that really makes a difference with slowing down this stormwater we're talking about. And then the other issue is across the world, in fact, not just the country, these genetically modified seeds of corn and soybeans are specifically designed to be used in concert with Roundup weed herbicide, result in, again, think of June, think of a tiny little corn plant, but there's literally nothing else in that field holding the soil. So that has now become standard operating procedure, again, when combined with these intense storm events, really leading to much more runoff into the lakes. And this is an example I took on the shoulder of Route 89 near Sheldrake that shows you a soybean field that I don't know for certain, but this was not after one of these huge 4-inch rain events. This was after just a regular thunderstorm, but the water actually came up onto the shoulder of Route 89. And you can see this is a dip in the field. I don't know for certain, but I think it's highly likely that if you go back and look at an aerial photo from 40, 50 years ago, they didn't plow the whole field. There could have been maybe 2 fields, or there was just an area that that this wasn't plowed. But again, if you have big equipment and you want to be efficient, you expand the field, and then these areas are vulnerable to the runoff. Now, across the region, a lot of work has been done to install what they call tile drains. And these are equivalent to what I use around my own home with drainage for my roof. Essentially, it's a perforated pipe you put in the field so the water can percolate down and then be, in this case, shunted to a drainage ditch next to a road. And it is something that reduces surface erosion, but it has some unintended consequences. In this case, someone might say, well, look at the water, it's really clear, so that's a good thing. Well, it doesn't mean it doesn't have phosphorus or nitrogen in it, though. And here's the challenging thing. When you put that pipe in, essentially, a lot of times what you're doing is you're interrupting the natural flow. Like normally the water would percolate down, say, oh, maybe groundwater's 5 more feet. And by putting in this pipe, you reduce the absorptive capacity of the watershed, in some cases by say 50%. So when you get a hard rain, you then are putting in these road ditches much more water, and you're creating what we call flashier situations. It's like a flash flood. So now you've shifted the problem to all our road ditches which if you just drive around and look at these things after storms, they really are scouring out the sides more and more. So it's helped with the surface runoff of these fields that leads to these other problems. In our particular case, we have a really big challenge between agricultural drainage systems that are inextricably linked with town highway drainage systems. So if you drive in Ulysses or Lansing or anywhere in farm country, you notice these ditches get bigger and bigger to the point where if you were to drive into them, you're not getting out. But Rebecca Schneider of Cornell has done research documenting how these systems have really modified our watersheds and reduced their resilience. So one of the challenges we have now is how do we slow down this water, make more of the phosphorus and nitrogen stay on the land as it once did, while still being able to protect roads and homes and infrastructure and withstand floods. Now, it's not just about agriculture, though. Our built environment, I think, is growing, and we have to pay attention as well. This is my favorite local example, which is our wonderful Wegmans parking lot, where literally most everyone has been there once. But if you go to the west side of the lot, you actually are on the border of a navigable waterway. And you think of all the cars that park there and a little bit of oil here, gasoline there, it all flows directly into Cayuga Lake. And especially when we have high water, in this case, what you can't see in this photo is the photo is taken right next to some petroleum storage tanks that, of course, were leaking a little bit. And this is a case where somehow we have to retrofit that lot in the future. So there's a detention basin or some way to, again, have the pollutants and nutrients settle out before getting to the lake. And a lot of this, it's really about details and paying attention. Some are permanent design issues, nothing's ever totally permanent, but long-term, like the Wegmans lot. But some of it is as it happens in construction. This is College Town on Dryden Road. I just was walking by, and you can see on the left side of this frame, that black fabric you see is what's commonly known as silt fence, which is designed to, on sites like this, reduce erosion. And this is a case where here's the sidewalk view, and you can see that silt fence isn't really too effective right here where it's kind of ripped and hanging. And you can see a storm drain that, again, where does it go? Right to Cayuga Lake. So this is a case where kind of as a community, there are lots of different ways that we feed, in this case, the cyanobacteria algae. And it means paying more attention at the design stage of when a development's approved, how it's constructed, how we individually use our property, or if we live in an apartment complex, how that is managed. They're like all these decisions. Now, as a region, I will say that because we have largely a rural Finger Lakes region, agriculture does have a big footprint along with these roadside transportation systems. So for the land trust standpoint, it's easy to see where do you get the bang for the buck. It's looking at this nexus of agriculture and transportation, but it doesn't mean that we also need to address these other issues. Now, and what do we do about it? We first have to understand the context. This is the view from Ithaca Falls from the top of it. I don't know the date, I think it was early 1900s, but a couple things you can notice here. You can see the bridge at Lake Street below, and the high school is today on the right, and you can see this delta of flow going to the lake through what is now Route 13. And you think of filtration and nutrients, how they settle out. This was a very different situation. I do not see the high school going away anytime soon. So as we think about how to address these issues, we first have to understand how different the situation is today. Here is looking back, the black diamond is the railroad you see in the foreground of this photo. This is from the west side, and you're looking across what is now Robert Treeman Marine Park, and you can see the Cassadilla Boathouse there. This was a very substantial flood in 1896, I believe. And but you can see how different the character of Ithaca's flats were. One way to look at this is Watkins Glen is built on a wetland, but you still have a fairly large wetland, Queen Catherine Marsh Wildlife Management Area. You can swim at the park in Watkins Glen because I think part of that is because you have about 800 acres of filtration going on through that wetland. Stewart Park was once backed by a large wetland, which is now largely the city of Ithaca, and we do not have that filtration on. Like the kidneys in the system have been removed. So now the question is, I don't see a lot of downtown blocks being converted to wetlands. So how do we put that kind of filtration and resilience back in the system? So as we conserve land that is really important to the health of the lake, we also recognize that may keep it from the problem from getting worse, but we do have to actively kind of recreate some of these areas that, again, slowed water runoff and let those nutrients, settle back on the land. And one of the big challenges is that if you are a farmer and you're growing crops, the first thing you did was even out all the hummocks and divots. And if there was a wet area, you drained it because it's not good for you making a living growing crops. So in certain areas where the land is no longer being used for agriculture, the Land Trust is partnering with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to restore wetlands and seasonal ponds and pools that on one hand provide excellent habitat for a variety of species, but also, again, help absorb particularly stormwater runoff. So this is a site in Skinny Atlas, near the south end of Skinny Atlas Lake, where just last year, we worked with Fish and Wildlife to restore some of these areas. And this is what it looked like in the summer. You see those pools around the edge of the field. They vary. Some are year-round, hold water. Others are ephemeral that come and go. They provide different types of habitat. But in the past, there were many more of these ponds, vernal pools, and wetlands out on the landscape, again, absorbing some of that stormwater runoff. And now we need even more of them because of these more intense storm events. Now, the other activity we're doing is also beneficial for carbon sequestration. And that is in these areas, agricultural areas next to streams, wetlands, and in this case, Otisco Lake, we're planting forests because those root systems, both to the canopy, filtering rain is on its way down, but then the root system stabilizing the soil can really play an important role. And in many cases, we've kind of gradually over generations just encroached too close on these streams in particular, so that these buffers that in some cases could be just 150 feet really can play an important difference in running and reducing runoff. Now, the challenge though is if I'm a farmer, on the margins of making a living, that 150 feet may be pretty important. So one of the challenges is securing those opportunities for getting the land. In some cases, it may be the land itself, but also sometimes it may be operational. If I have a 1,000-acre farm and the stream goes down the middle, all of a sudden I may ask tricky questions like, well, who's going to maintain the border of what's now going to be brush, and what if weeds come up and affect my field? So there are a lot of legitimate issues to wrestle with, but it's vital that we restore these areas both as habitat and for filtration. And what we've learned, because we're still new at this, but as we planted trees, we've learned actually it's not very hard to plant a tree. It's very challenging to get a tree to be 10 years old. And one of the key issues ecologically for our region is the deer overpopulation. And it's not just here, it's throughout much of the Northeast and the Midwest. And you can learn very quickly that if you plant anything that's not protected somehow, it will disappear with the deer. And the Land Trust does have a deer management program where with safety first as a priority, we do allow hunters on with permits. They have to meet us, they have to do reporting. Some areas it's bow only, some areas we close the preserve, but we've host about 300 hunters on different preserves. Not all of our preserves are hunted, but many are. And yet we've also learned from that experience how difficult it is to address this issue on a property by property basis. So we're also talking to the State Department of Environmental Conservation and others to look at how we can look at statewide policies to address the issue, because there are real limitations on what you can do on an individual property. This is just an example of the impact the deer are having locally. This is at our Sweedler Preserve at Lick Brook, which is hunted, and this is why it is hunted. On the right side of the fence, you see kind of the open forest many of us have come to think is normal, but it's not. That's because the deer are browsing anything that comes up. On the left, you see what we call a deer exclosure, where we've maintained this fence to see when the deer are removed from the picture, what's happening. And all of those are tree saplings growing up. A good kind of test you can do anywhere you go for a walk in the woods is look for a maple seedling. And frequently this time of year, you can see lots of little maple seedlings. But think about, why don't you see any that are knee high or thigh high? Many of our forests each year produce this huge carpet of maple seedlings, but they get eaten. They never make it. So this is a big issue, and there are a lot of effects from it, because if you are a ovenbird, a little warbler that nests in the woods on the ground, how do you think your survival rate's going to be on the right with raccoons, skunks, coyotes, everything prowling around looking to eat your nest, versus the cover you see on the left? So there are lots of impacts on other species caused by this imbalance. One of the big issues we also face that affects, in some cases, lake water quality, but also just the ecology of our region, are non-native invasive species. There are aquatic non-native invasive species that are concerned, but right now I'm going to focus on those that are terrestrial. This is a view of one of our focus areas, an absolutely spectacular spot, the Chemung River between Elmira and Corning. There's a wonderful stretch of about 6 miles of river that is not next to the interstate. Much of the Chemung is adjacent to the interstate, and it's not my idea of great paddling because of the noise from the road. But this is a wonderful stretch. The state has done a good job at putting multiple access points, and I recommend canoeing or kayaking down here. This is an area where the land trust has several preserves, and one of them is on the left side of this picture. You see an old field next to the river, and that is largely covered, or was covered, by non-native invasive shrubs, bush honeysuckle, multiflora rose, and autumn olive. And these have all been introduced. Here's an autumn olive. There's plenty around Ithaca too. And our invasive species include lots of plants. They include diseases, insects. Right now, our ash trees are being afflicted with a bug called the emerald ash borer. The spotted lanternfly you may hear about, another insect that's come in. Now, some of those are unintentional. They come over on a shipping pallet. They think the emerald ash borer came specifically to Detroit International Airport on a shipping pallet. But then we have ones that were intentional. The autumn olive, the shrub you see here, it is a good wildlife plant. Wildlife like it. But again, it was taken from Asia, and now it's kind of run amok. It's all about this question of balance, because these plants, their natural predators or diseases aren't here. There's some real issues with maintaining balance in the face of now, particularly global trade, all these species. So while we do management, the other thing we recognize is we need greater funding at institutions like Cornell to research issues like biological control, of potentially bringing over a pest, say an insect that this species doesn't like, but ensuring that it won't run amok with our native species. Even looking at genetic manipulation that might make more resistance. But in the meantime, we are doing what we can, recognizing we're not going to eliminate these species, but favoring native flora to which native fauna is adapted. So here you see a contractor essentially with like a giant lawnmower mowing this stuff down that we then are planting with native stock. But again, planting's the easy part. It's protecting it from the deer and then the encroaching, invasive vegetation. Now, in terms of where we work, the Land Trust wants to make sure that as we pursue these conservation projects in an area the size of Vermont, that we don't just answer the phone and protect individual parcels of land. So we're really trying to secure intact landscapes that in the future, despite climate change, despite all the changes going on, these will have a lot of value for wildlife, for watershed protection, and for people. So our largest project we're undertaking anywhere is called the Emerald Necklace Greenbelt. And this highlights that area, which extends from Finger Lakes National Forest in the west to Hammond Hill and Robinson Hollow in the east. And this is a really remarkable opportunity where, because of Depression era farm buyouts, we have 50,000 acres of existing public land. But it was never really designed. It was created by these programs that bought land from cash-strapped farmers in the Depression. And the rich, fertile valleys that separate them are largely privately owned. So as development is kind of moving out those valleys, we're really trying to just connect the dots and secure key parcels, whether it's in public forest land, unique habitats, and then protecting a recreational resource, the Finger Lakes Trail and other associated trail systems. And the value of this is by maintaining these connections, you have opportunities for wide-ranging mammals like this bobcat. And thanks to trail cams, we now know that bobcats are actually fairly common around Tompkins County. This bobcat was, this photo was taken by one of my staff who lives on South Hill, in the town of Ithaca, and from her kitchen window at 8 in the morning. And typically they're hard to see. They're generally nocturnal, but we've documented them from a number of our preserves, as with fishers, one of the larger members, the weasel family, a species that was eliminated 100 years ago and is returned with the return of the forest. So in these large forested landscapes, we have black bear, bobcat, fisher, and also the opportunity as climate changes, but we maintain those connections, will maintain the viability and allow species to migrate. And how we move forward on this is parcel by parcel. We work with landowners who has to be on their time frame and taking into account their financial goals. So across the region, a lot of what the Land Trust is doing is trying not to annoy landowners who sometimes are multi-generational families involving different folks, and really just try to be there at the time they're considering perhaps passing the land down in the family, selling it, what have you. And this is a Coddington Road in the town of Caroline, where it's a great example of how we're knitting together these connections, in this case between Danby State Forest and Shindagan Hollow State Forest. This is an area where we acquired, the area in green here is a new 143-acre preserve that will soon host the Finger Lakes Trail. And what you see on this map, State Route 96B is on the left side of the map. And there's a little piece of Danby State Forest that used to be all alone, but we've acquired 3 properties there that are becoming part of the state forest. And then this new preserve, in the center of the map. And then on the right side of the map, we also helped the Finger Lakes Trail Conference acquire this kind of purple parcel that gets to the middle of the valley. And one of the challenges with the Finger Lakes Trail is a good portion of that trail is not permanently secure, and it's on a handshake agreement. And what happens is lands turn over and subdivision happens, the trail is evicted. So in this case, there are some challenges to continuing as it does now to the north. So we're going to swing the trail to the south and utilize the same abandoned rail bed in the center of this valley. But this is a good example of how we essentially try to assemble these puzzle pieces over time. So, again, landowner by landowner using different strategies, but trying to secure these corridors of protected lands. Another example, just off the Cayuga Inlet, important buffer for both Cayuga Inlet and Enfield Creek. But I think probably most well-known because this is a very popular access point for the Finger Lakes Trail, bordering Route 13 right at the intersection of 13 and 3496. This was a case where the land trust moved quickly because this is, I think, maybe the only property in the town of Ithaca that's zoned industrial. And it's a level field that happens to host a parking lot that on a typical weekend will have 15 cars in it of people going hiking. But that could have all gone away. So the land trust has secured it both as buffer and for public access. And this map highlights a story that really of how the best conservation happens. The land trust preserve at Lick Brook was the first project we ever undertook. And that work still continues on Lick Brook to secure more land. But here you also see a Cornell Botanic Gardens natural area. The land, the state land bordering the Cayuga Inlet was acquired for the Black Diamond. The town of Ithaca has been a supporter, the county. So really it takes, all these partners working together to make it happen. But we know this part of Ithaca is going to change in the future and there will be more people, but we've secured, in this case, 2,000 acres of contiguous habitat and recreational land that is actually accessible by TCAT bus. So really pleased with that. Now, back to the lake though, what I know a lot of folks have probably heard about is Bell Station. This is a picture of Bell Station, which is 470 acres that was acquired by New York State Electric and Gas many years ago. And it was proposed for the development of a nuclear power plant. And it's immediately north of the now defunct Milliken Station power plant. We have been pursuing this for years. In this case, it's not something we want to own and retain as a nature preserve, but it's one where we're partnering with the State Department of Environmental Conservation, which would like to create a public wildlife management area. The couple things have happened along the way. The first is that the project changed a bit because we were going to buy the entire 470 acres and just get it in state ownership. But then we learned that there was a proposal to create a solar renewable energy solar farm that was based on Milliken Station, but they really needed to utilize, they wanted to utilize some of the fields at the easternmost end of the property, and that the town of Lansing supported that. So we consulted with the state DEC and both agreed that that was a reasonable thing to do. So we factored that in. That took a lot of back and forth. But then the scramble came at Labor Day when we heard that NYSEG intended to sell the property at public auction and was specifically marketing it for development. And there were two issues here. One is the money, where this is not a cheap piece of property, but more so than that was the process, because the land trust or any government agency has to be bound by an appraisal process to document what we pay for the land. And that works pretty well most of the time. But in a hot real estate market, in this case, we feared that even if we had the money, we might get outbid, and that would not serve the community's goals. So fortunately, we and a lot of other folks spoke up from across the community, encouraged the governor to reach out to NYSEG and bring about cancellation of the auction, which she did, and the auction was canceled. And we're now pursuing direct acquisition with the notion that we would buy the land, subdivided into two parcels. One parcel, the shoreline, and kind of the first row of fields you see there would become a public conservation area. We would transfer to the state DEC. And then we would, with the fields furthest away, work out an arrangement with the solar proposal. So that's very much in process and hope to have good news, within the next month. Now, just as that was happening though, we received word too that Camp Barton on the west side of the lake was being considered for sale. If you're not aware, the scouts nationally are in bankruptcy and they're facing a lot of lawsuits for past sexual abuse. At the same time, their numbers have just kind of generally been trending down. So there was a question about the future of Camp Barton that is still unresolved, but we have been working with the local Scout Council for several months now, trying to figure out a future for Camp Barton that is not putting it on the block and selling it for subdivision. Two particular concerns there. One is the future management is actually a lot more complicated than Bell Station, because you look in this photo, Bell Station, there's a dead end road on the north border, but otherwise it's woods and fields. Camp Barton not only has a lot of structures, it also has a public road through the property that's about 50 to 100 feet from the lakeshore. So from a site management perspective, it becomes very challenging to think about how you allow for public access, but prevent public abuse of, say, on a Saturday night, the teenage kids who want to come out and party there. So it also has neighbors too. So it's very challenging in that way. But we are working with a variety of partners trying to figure it out. And that's, the future at this point is uncertain. Now, the land trust started out in 30 years ago, and it had no staff. It was all volunteers. And today we're able to have conserved over 27,000 acres and tackle these more ambitious projects because we still have all those volunteers. Each year we involve at least 200 volunteers or more. But now, thanks to our membership and our donors who give anything from $35 to a lot more, we support a staff of 16. And that is so important because it sounds, on one hand, like a lot of people, but if you work in 12 counties and you're inviting the public on thousands of acres of land, you realize it's really not that much. So we've been very fortunate in the pandemic. We saw a lot of increased use of our preserves, as did all the parks. And that allowed, I think a lot of those folks, supported us to a greater degree. So we were able to continue, our growth trend, because each year we keep adding new public preserves and new commitments. So we have to keep growing the organization. But if you are a member of the Land Trust or a volunteer, I want to thank you. And if you're not yet, I'll momentarily provide, some websites where you can, find out more. But in this era of climate change, invasive species, toxic algae, it's easy to be, overwhelmed by all this negative news. And I love this photo, first because it's totally amazing that they have a shot where they're able to get the chicks, the adult and Teganic all in one shot. But I think this is the inspiration that nature is really indeed resilient, that peregrines were gone from Teganic Falls for 75 years and they're back. And bald eagles are back on every lake. In the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State, took down a dam on I think it's the Elwha River, salmon are back. That if we do the right things, there is a lot we can do. And we're fortunate here in the Finger Lakes because while in some areas we're economically challenged, we still have a little time and room to take care of some of this. I moved back to the region from Northern Virginia. Boy, it's a lot tougher when you have the scale, the pressures on the land that you see near our big cities. So I do take heart from this photo and the fact that last week on the Cayuga Inlet near Lake Brook, I got to within 50 feet of a bald eagle, a mature one on the creek, which is the closest I've ever got. And yet it's actually become where it's not that hard to see bald eagles. So anyway, before opening it up for any questions you might have, did want to share these, web links, both on, we do have a page or a section of our website that's dedicated specific to information about water quality. And I should mention too that we do a lot of work with the State Department of Environmental Conservation and adding lands to its portfolio. There are a lot of great trails out on DEC lands, but between us, the DEC does not have the best website. and their information on trails is not the greatest. So for years, we would talk to the tourism folks and say, you really should do more with outdoor recreation. And the tourism folks would say, you really should do it, and so on and so on. So after that long conversation, we bit the bullet and we created a gofingerlakes.org, which includes some land trust sites, but really it's simply, you have folks visiting for the weekend, you want to know what are the top 60 places to go in the Finger Lakes, whether it's for hiking, cycling, paddling, and it's really just trying to share good information on that. So that's what gofingerlakes.org is as well. So thank you all for being here this evening. I'm going to stop sharing and just open it up for your questions.
Hi, Andy. So I'm going to go through questions as people put them in the chat and read them off to you. And we have 3 that happened during your talk. The first one is, what determines Finger Lakes Land Trust acquisition and activity priorities? And how do these priorities shift over time?
Good question. Well, as I mentioned during the program, we actually did shift several years ago when our board of directors looked at the toxic algae issue and said, we need to prioritize more on water quality. But frequently it's not an either or, it's just a matter of emphasis, because a lot of water quality projects also have habitat benefits, may have recreational benefits, but it's a dynamic, we try to be dynamic. And I would say that one, we have a strategic plan, and we have planning documents where we try to ensure annually that about at least 3/4 of the projects we do are proactive, strategically directed, and then no more than 1/4, say, are opportunistic. And by opportunistic, I mean that, not that it's a bad project, but for example, in Corning, we have a preserve called the Houghton Preserve that was not an identified priority focus area, but it's about 160 or 200 acre nature preserve, literally next to the city of Corning. That really is a wonderful place where the Houghton family came to us and said, we'll help make this happen. So it is, dynamic. We try to, get the most leverage out of our projects. And a key thing though is feasibility, because there's some projects that are much more feasible. So for example, adding to public conservation land, it's a very different question if we're doing a project where to make it happen, we need to fund $150,000 for 2 years, but then we know the state will pay us back. That's very different than a project that may cost $1 million and there's no public money available, or a project where we're talking not about conveying to the state, but owning it and taking care of it in perpetuity, because that means we have to add to our endowment. So it's kind of a complex formula where it's dynamic, and it also depends, what are we being asked to do? Increasingly, what we're trying to do, because we can't be everywhere, is bring along partners like the town of Ithaca. The town of Ithaca, we've helped protect about 150 acres now in West Hill. And at the end of the day, we do not have any legal interest there, but we're helping develop their capacity. And I see more of that in the future too.
So thanks for that. The next question is kind of wanting you to speak more on, is the phosphorus problem definitely from surrounding farms? Is there more to it? I think they wanted elaboration.
Yeah, and I should mention that the consultants under a state contract have developed what's called a total maximum daily load model for Cayuga Lake. And Rick, feel free to chime in if you know a little more of the background than I do. But essentially, this is a tool used by analyzing the watershed and how much phosphorus is in the lake to kind of develop a future management plan. Chesapeake Bay has one. In this case, I think my recollection of what prompted it is lake source cooling, because Cornell has a lake source cooling plant which takes in water from the deeper part of the lake that's cold and then deposits it on the shelf, like not far off the Stewart Park, it's a little warmer. The thing about phosphorus that's important to know is if it's cold in the bottom of the lake, it's inactive. It's not accessible to these cyanobacteria. But if it's shallow and warm, it is. So I think there was a question in this case, well, clearly lake source cooling is not adding phosphorus, but are you warming it up enough to make it available? So that there are sources of phosphorus from a lot of different areas. I think, again, all you have to do is look at Google Earth, though, and just if you look at the watershed, particularly from Lansing north, the dominant land use is agriculture. And, you know, from a lot of different, you know, aspects of it, it's a significant, you know, contributor. At the same time, it does not mean that along the lakeshore, there are houses with septic systems that may not function right, that in a particular cove, that could be a much bigger issue. But, you know, so it's not any one source, but it's simply on looking at how our land is used. We have a lot of agriculture and the way it's done. It does seem that that's a significant contributor.
Let's see. So someone was asking, is Ithaca on an MS4 system? MS4.
I do not know. I think you need more of a lake person than a land person for that one.
Got it. And the next question is, I wonder, I understand that Cayuga Lake has some of the worst HABs issues in the Finger Lakes. Why is that? You had mentioned Catherine Marsh in Watkins. And are there other factors that might be causing this? Urbanization, agriculture, perhaps grapes are less prone to erosion?
It's a very good question. And this year, I think it varies year to year, because when this whole problem came about, Owasco was one of the worst, and Honeoye. And recently, and both those lakes have continued to have problems, but I can't say exactly whether it's that they've made more progress addressing some of those problems, because they have some of the same issues. The other thing, though, to factor in is because these storms are so localized, you actually do year to year have different impacts of storm events, you know, depending on where they are. Again, I mentioned that that storm that did a lot of damage on the Cayuga Inlet, 4 inches down, you know, just in Danby, and 1 inch in Ithaca. When you have some of those happen across drainage divides, you can have sometimes one lake, say Cayuga, gets hit a lot worse than Owasco. So there's a lot of variability. So I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that Owasco, which was really, I think, one of the worst, they've really invested considerable effort. I would say more than Cayuga. So it could be that they're addressing the problem more. One thing to mention about Cayuga and Seneca, to address the problem, it's simply harder in some ways, because from a coordination standpoint, these are the 2 biggest lakes. You're talking about a lot of jurisdictions in the watershed, even for coordinating what happens in Seneca Falls to the southernmost part of the watershed here. It is, I think, a more daunting challenge for particularly Cayuga and Seneca.
Let's see if there's any other questions. The person who asked about MS4 said, it's a municipal separate storm sewer system versus a CSO, which is a combined stormwater and wastewater system. Do we know?
Yeah, and I don't know how big an issue that is here. It's particularly big issue in Northeast urban cities where these investments are huge. Like, I lived in Alexandria, Virginia, where this is a problem. What happens is in the design of old sewer systems, they combine stormwater and sewage. So what happens is the system gets overwhelmed in these storm events, and then it releases untreated sewage into, in this case, the Potomac River. The cost of these redeveloping these systems is just like astronomical. I do not know about the city of Ithaca, we actually, I think one of the things is we don't have large urban areas. So my sense is it's less of an issue here because the flows, you look at Manhattan or just the amount of volume they're dealing with when you have a rain event, it's a huge issue. But here, because we just have fewer sewage treatment plants and smaller systems, I don't think it's as big.
So far, I think that is the end of the questions. We can check and see if anybody else has any questions. Now would be the time to put them in the question and answer or the chat.
Well, thank you, Andy. That was a great presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I think everyone else did too. I'm getting a few texts from folks saying how much they enjoyed it. And I think I don't know, just taking that global view of how your work in conservation relates to water quality is really important, and very long term, for sure, which is the way to approach it. It'll be interesting to see how in the short term this really plays out. But I was
the one, Rick, if I may, the one charge, because I want to recognize the Friends of Stewart Park of how much you've done to kind of reimagine Stewart Park and set it in that direction. As a resident of the city of Ithaca, I would like to see the same when you go to that Wegmans lot and think that that store is going to be redeveloped at some point. Shouldn't we, on that waterway, which is navigable with a canoe or kayak, have a design where there's parkland and on one hand address lake water quality, but redesign our community open space? And you think of the amount of attention that goes into the built environment to kind of see a little more on kind of our local open space than our waterways, because I think we do need to pay more attention, because to do the homework in advance, so when the opportunity comes, we're ready to seize it.
Yeah, it is surprising. I think that area has just been, maybe, as I know that the city has just put in a significant grant application to extend the Black Diamond Trail to the Gateway Bridge, or the Bridge to Nowhere, I guess is commonly known. And I think they feel pretty good about the prospects for that. And I think that will bring some more attention to that area, which I think it's not directly adjacent, but I think it's clearly an issue there. So that area will change a lot, but I think it will, it's a good point. I know you've certainly discussed that before. So maybe the Blue Way Trail could help focus on that kind of thing too, just really getting, because I think we do need those little intimate paddling channels there. I think we have the lake, but it's nice to also have that more river experience, and it's actually a nice area back there. Well, I guess if we have no more questions, we can call it a night. And thank you, Andy. It was a really great presentation. We do appreciate it. And please support the Finger Lakes Land Trust. Their Go Finger Lakes site, the Cayuga Waterfront Trail, just got up on there. Kelly has been after us for about a year to get it up, and we got her the information and we're up on that. It's a great website for folks that want to get to know the region and find out how to access these sites. So that's a really important resource. So, okay, thank you to Janelle and to Leah for helping us with the tech aspects. And make sure you, if you like this presentation, you want to do one more and you like music, please join us on October 27th. It's kind of a great Ithaca music story that has real strong roots in Stewart Park. So we're excited to share that with Corey Earl. So hope to see you. I also
wanted to share that if you enjoyed this presentation, that we will be getting it up on the Friends of Stewart Park YouTube page, and we'll send it out, the link to it, once we have it up, so that you can share it with friends.
Great. Thank you, Janelle. Okay, good night, everyone. Thank you very much. Thanks, Andy.